The studio lights burned hot as Harrison Ford settled into the guest chair, jaw tight, eyes alert in that familiar way that made the audience lean forward before he'd even spoken. He wore a simple dark jacket, no frills, no attempt to charm the room before earning it. Stephen Colbert flashed his practiced grin, papers in hand, and welcomed him with thunderous applause. The band hit a triumphant sting. For a moment, everything felt routine, polished, safe. But Ford's eyes scanned the crowd like a man stepping into unfamiliar territory, and there was something restless in the way he adjusted his posture, as if he already sensed where the conversation might drift. Colbert opened with admiration, praising Ford's legacy, rattling off iconic roles with mock reverence. The audience laughed when Colbert joked about Ford's eternal scowl, calling it America's most beloved facial expression. Ford smirked, barely. He nodded once, acknowledging the laugh without feeding it. Colbert leaned in, warming to the bit, teasing Ford about being dragged back into action franchises, about planes, whips, blasters, and the impossibility of retirement. The jokes came fast, sharp, playful on the surface. The crowd roared. Ford chuckled once, short and clipped, then replied with dry understatement, correcting a detail, grounding the joke in reality. It was subtle, but the shift was there. Colbert, sensing momentum, pressed harder. He joked about actors who keep showing up for the paycheck, about nostalgia being Hollywood's favorite crutch. He waved a hand theatrically toward Ford, clearly exaggerating, clearly expecting a laugh. Ford's eyes narrowed, not in anger yet, but in focus. He leaned forward slightly, elbows near his knees, the posture of a man deciding whether to let something pass. He answered calmly, voice steady, talking about commitment, about showing up because the work still mattered, not because it was easy. The audience laughed again, but this time it was softer, uncertain. Colbert tried to lighten it, tossing in a self-deprecating jab, but then circled back, quipping about how audiences loved grumpy Harrison more than thoughtful Harrison. That did it. Ford's smile vanished completely. He straightened, shoulders squaring, eyes locked on Colbert with an intensity that cut through the studio's warmth. "That's not a character," he said evenly. "That's a shortcut." The laughter died almost instantly, replaced by a few scattered claps that quickly stopped. You could hear the hum of the lights, the faint rustle of cue cards backstage. Colbert blinked, surprised but still smiling, trying to keep the tone light. He joked about late-night TV needing shortcuts to survive. Ford shook his head slowly. He leaned forward again, closer now, voice low but unmistakably firm. He spoke about decades of work, about learning lines when no one cared, about failing publicly and getting back up. He talked about respect, not demanded, but earned. Each sentence landed heavier than the last. The audience shifted in their seats. Some nodded, others stared, wide-eyed, unsure whether they were allowed to react at all. Colbert attempted to interrupt, to steer the conversation back to safer waters, but Ford raised a hand, not aggressive, just final. "Let me finish," he said. The words weren't loud, but they carried authority. Cameras cut between them, catching Colbert's smile tightening, his eyebrows lifting as he recalculated in real time. Ford's voice gained speed now, frustration leaking through the calm like a crack in concrete. He talked about how easy it was to laugh at someone who stayed long enough to become a symbol, how hard it was to see the person underneath. The studio felt smaller, the air heavier. A nervous laugh bubbled up from somewhere in the audience and died immediately. Ford glanced toward the crowd, then back to Colbert. "You want honesty," he snapped, the edge finally undeniable. He gestured broadly, not accusing, but expansive, as if including everyone in the room. "Here it is." The silence that followed was absolute. No music cue, no laughter, just a live broadcast balanced on a knife's edge, and a legend who had decided he was done playing along. The silence lingered long enough to feel deliberate, as if the studio itself was holding its breath. Stephen Colbert shifted in his chair, the practiced rhythm of late-night hosting momentarily broken. He glanced toward the band, then back to Harrison Ford, searching for a crack where humor might slip back in. The audience waited, unsure whether to clap, laugh, or simply watch. Ford remained standing, hands resting at his sides now, shoulders tense but controlled, eyes still fixed on Colbert with a steady, unblinking intensity. Colbert cleared his throat and offered a light remark, something about live television being an adventure sport. A few nervous chuckles fluttered through the crowd. Ford didn't smile. He exhaled slowly, the kind of breath someone takes before deciding how much truth to release. "This isn't about jokes," he said, quieter than before, which somehow made it sharper. It's about how easily we turn people into props. The words landed with weight. Cameras zoomed in. Somewhere backstage, a producer's voice whispered urgently into a headset. Colbert nodded, his expression shifting from performer to listener. He started to respond, but Ford continued, momentum carrying him forward. He talked about interviews that reduced years of work to memes, about headlines that preferred explosions to substance. He admitted, almost reluctantly, that he'd played along for years because it was easier than pushing back. The admission softened the room just slightly. The audience leaned in, sensing vulnerability beneath the steel. "I'm tired," Ford said, and for the first time, the edge in his voice cracked. Not of acting, of pretending. He gestured around the studio, at the lights, the applause signs, the machinery of entertainment. You invite someone here, you say you want them. Then you shrink them down because it's convenient. The words weren't shouted, but they rang louder than anything before them. Colbert finally spoke, carefully. He acknowledged the point, admitted that comedy often relied on exaggeration, on shorthand that could cross into disrespect. It wasn't a punchline, it was an explanation. He apologized, not theatrically, not to the crowd, but directly to Ford. The sincerity surprised the audience, and a ripple of applause broke out, tentative at first, then stronger. Ford closed his eyes for a brief moment, as if weighing whether that was enough. He nodded once. "That's all I'm asking," he said. The tension didn't vanish, but it eased, like a rope finally given slack. Ford sat back down, the chair creaking slightly under the shift. The movement alone seemed to release the room. The band played a soft, improvised chord, unsure whether to punctuate the moment or stay out of its way. Colbert took a breath, resetting. He thanked Ford for the honesty, calling it a reminder of why live television still mattered. Ford replied with a dry remark about danger being part of the job. This time, the laughter felt earned. The interview continued, but the tone had changed. The questions were slower, more deliberate. Colbert asked about craft, about aging in an industry obsessed with youth, about choosing projects for meaning rather than momentum. Ford answered thoughtfully, the fire replaced by a grounded calm. The audience responded differently now. They listened instead of waiting for cues. Applause came at unexpected moments, not for jokes, but for insight. Ford spoke about collaboration, about learning from younger actors, about the relief of no longer needing to prove anything. Colbert nodded along, less host than counterpart, allowing pauses to breathe rather than rushing to fill them. As the segment wrapped, Colbert stood and shook Ford's hand, holding it a beat longer than usual. The gesture felt intentional. The crowd rose to its feet, a standing ovation that carried a different energy than the show's opening cheer. Ford acknowledged it with a small nod, a hand raised briefly in thanks. No grin, no wink, just presence. When the cameras cut to commercial, the studio buzzed with delayed reaction. Audience members whispered to each other, replaying what they'd just seen. Online, clips were already spreading, headlines forming in real time. But inside the room, what lingered wasn't scandal. It was the rare sensation of having watched something unscripted, uncomfortable, and genuine unfold under hot lights. Ford walked off stage without theatrics, the fire spent, leaving behind a late-night set that felt subtly altered. Colbert watched him go, thoughtful, aware that the show would move on tomorrow as it always did. Yet for one night, the formula had cracked, and through that crack, something honest had slipped through, brief, volatile, and impossible to ignore.